Welcome back to another episode of Drag To Amerikkka. This episode takes on a real Renaissance man. This flamboyant, charismatic leader to me was the equivalent of black pride. Marcus Garvey was too black for some black people and had too much power for white people. Back in those times, which ironically still happens today, you just can't please everyone. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Interestingly enough, Marcus Garvey didn't have any concerns with the naysayers. His concern was uniting all blacks. He is a true icon. Let's get straight to it. Never forget, intelligence rules the world and ignorance carries out the burden. Therefore, remove yourself as far as possible from ignorance and seek as far as possible for intelligence. This phrase is incredibly wise. It was quotes like this that made this man a member of the Civil Rights Justice League. A matter of fact, more like the M-men of the Civil Rights Movement. The men that made up the M-men were Martin, Malcolm, and you guessed it, Marcus. Garvey changed the narrative for blacks around the globe. In the early 1900s, this man took charge, encouraging thousands of blacks to finally dream big. It all started when Garvey was born in St. Ann, Jamaica in 1887. As a young boy, Garvey knew he was different. Young Garvey was enlightened by reading a book by Booker T. Washington. In the rough, impoverished streets of Jamaica, Garvey learned from the book on how to be self-reliant as well as self-motivated to produce your own wealth. As an underprivileged Pickney, Marcus always dreamed to bring all blacks together. Marcus knew that to change his outcome, he had to fight and work hard. Garvey visioned blacks having their own nation, bringing all blacks together from all over the world. In 1914, Marcus Garvey started a movement on the island of Jamaica called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. This movement was formed to promote black awareness and black power. A couple of years after Garvey formed this group, he brought his organization to the States. Mr. Garvey was an extraordinary speaker, innovator, and organizer. Soon, the Universal Negro Improvement Association was established. UNIA establishments would have several chapters worldwide. This Caribbean came to America and took the whole structure by storm. Many Southern Negroes were seeking to embrace their new freedom, establish job security, and create a new life. Southern Negroes that remained in the South, in my opinion, didn't see many of the benefits the Reconstruction era had to offer. This led to large groups of blacks settling in northern states. Harlem, New York was a stomping ground for many Negroes to make a name for themselves. To many freed slaves, the northern states had similar issues with racism. Blacks faced injustices along with many storms due to white supremacy. Harvey made sure blacks were motivated to work with him to reshape the taste of freedom. Marcus Garvey was one of the first to try to stop the spread of black self-hate. He wanted to change the minds of the controversial mental beatings some blacks dealt with living in the South. Racist Democrats definitely instilled fear in many blacks that were trying to find their way after slavery. While in Harlem, New York, Marcus Garvey created a parade to show the honoring black legacy. Garvey and parade showmen would dress in military garments, celebrating blacks as a whole. Blacks showed up to Garvey's parades in huge numbers. Garvey was a huge voice for black-owned businesses, banks, and institutions. Marcus Garvey wanted blacks to flaunt their blackness with pure confidence and grace. It's fair to say he never promoted working for the white man or anyone. Garvey's mission was to unite all blacks, create wealthy black nations, and leave all the oppressors behind. In his time era, many blacks that heard his ideas were on board. However, the naysayers and angry blacks that sat in corners judging Garvey for helping the community weren't interested in building anything. Tons of whites were not pleased with this black power uprising. This man's iconic way of free thinking was outside of the box. His goal was to charter blacks back to Africa. His mission was to purchase ships with the help of the community to transport all Negroes from all backgrounds back to Africa. This enterprise was called the Black Star Line. Every person that invested in the Black Star Line company would have a share in the wealth. Garvey felt extreme measures should be taken because he knew blacks would never receive fair share in America or in any other country. The purchases of the ships to bring blacks back to Africa scared the elites. This angered many whites. Garvey's influence was growing stronger and stronger within the black communities around the country. Marcus knew the treatment Democratic white supremacists dished out to blacks would never be condemned, so he thought it was time to separate blacks. Marcus Garvey was unapologetic for promoting black pride. Blacks in that time period were too afraid to shout about black power, yet Garvey traveled through the nation promoting black pride. While striving to make big contributions to make change for blacks, several prominent New York City politicians were not pleased by this uprising. FBI agent J. Edgar Hoover, along with the politicians, were totally enraged. A DA of New York City named Edwin Kilrow tried numerous times to make charges stick to Garvey like glue, but all attempts failed. That's part of the reason why the FBI became forcefully involved. Hoover decided to target Garvey plus make up false statements with false controversies about Garvey. Apparently, Garvey's political point of views were not worthy of the United States. The divided states of America's FBI allegedly claimed Garvey was a Negro agitator for uplifting and giving hope to blacks. The FBI claimed he was the leader of the Pan-Africa movement. The FBI tried everything from tax evasion to immigration compromises to nail Marcus Garvey. Garvey even had threats upon his life. In 1919, a man named George Taylor attempted to assassinate Garvey. On October 14, 1919, Taylor stormed into Garvey's UNIA office in Harlem and shot Garvey twice in the leg and grazed his skull. Garvey hurt, yet such a fighter still made it to a speaking engagement in Philadelphia to promote the Star Line the next day. The FBI finally had bogus charges. In 1923, Garvey was sentenced to 5 years in prison for mail fraud, which ended the inspirational movement. The FBI was so obsessed with bringing Garvey down, they eventually deported Marcus Garvey back to his homeland. It's a shame he was labeled as a Negro agitator because he was tired of seeing his people being slaughtered by the oppressors. This man actually predicted many of the issues that would plague blacks after slavery. Marcus Garvey created ideas to inspire blacks. I guess in his mind, he figured going back to Africa was the only solution to end the harsh treatment blacks received from evil whites. I mean, blacks were minding their own business in Africa. Researching, I learned many Africans were either captured by Europeans that invaded Africa, or some Europeans purchased Africans from other Africans. Yes, wealthy Africans in Africa owned slaves as well as other ethnicities. However, that's a whole nother show. Could this be the reason some blacks think they're superior over other blacks? For some reason, some blacks born in Africa feel they are better than blacks for, say, born in America. And I wonder why. Aren't all black people viewed as black regardless of what continent? Then we have some white people that think they're the cat's meow. Whoever said white was right in the first place? Garvey knew the Negro's mindset would make or break their reality. That's why he wanted to empower blacks. Garvey may have been ahead of his time, because today, some in society tend to think the darker the skin, the less educated, the less important you are, which is totally untrue. White agitators in slave days thought the darker the skin, the less human the black man was. That thought is horrifying and cruel. Slave masters thought lighter-skinned blacks were more honorable than darker-skinned blacks. Lighter-skinned blacks didn't really work in the fields. The part that makes me angry is that most wicked slave masters view darker blacks as less than, yet most of these slave master bigots would rape, disrespect, and sexually misuse black women of any shade. Darker-skinned blacks deal with colorism in a major way. However, there's an issue in black communities that light skin is always the best skin, yet some light-skinned blacks are treated unfairly at times by other blacks. Several light-skinned blacks may feel they aren't black enough and feel ostracized. It's so sad yet very deep. I know Marcus Garvey didn't want blacks to feel this way. Could colorism be the ultimate racism in the black community? Racism and colorism are not welcomed at all. I give props to Garvey because he wanted to unify all blacks, to start black nations. What did blacks do that was so offensive to whites in the first place? Were these white racists flat out lazy or power hungry? To me, these white extremists were the real bullies. They say bullies are hateful people that produce hate. I wonder what created the white man to be so hateful and evil towards blacks. What drove these white supremacists to do unthinkable vile acts to blacks? White extremists in those days were in love with power. We know some whites treat racism like it doesn't exist. Yet I ask the question, does the black community treat colorism like it doesn't exist? It's a major topic, and I acknowledge Marcus Garvey for honoring all tones of black. Marcus Garvey didn't want black people marginalized. Some called this man a racist, others called him flamboyant. While some rocked with him to the end and others sat back hating on him, any way you spin it, Marcus Garvey was a true essence of black power. He even had the nickname Black Moses. Marcus Garvey was the originator of the I'm Black and I'm Proud movement for blacks. We salute Marcus Garvey for being the pioneer of black pride. Thank you, Mr. Garvey, for being one of the first civil rights leaders to implement black self-love within all black skin. Drag To Amerikkka will always tackle these harsh topics today, not just in February. To all my listeners, make sure you wash your hands 1,000,000 times. Spray lights on your house, car, and everywhere you can. I'm Ty Worldwide. Take care. God bless.